In Super Mario 64, Tick-Tock Clock is known to be one of the toughest levels of the game, where its extremely vertical design and narrow platforms makes any mistake a virtual death sentence. So what if, on top of that, you remove the entire jumping mechanic? What if you wanted to use the A button as little as possible? Well, that's what the real-time A button challenge community has tried to do over the past few years, and in Tick-Tock Clock, runners are coming very close to the human limit. So today, I'd like to talk about how rolling to the cage was conducted in only a single A press. So let's look at the run, and I'll explain step by step how this was achieved. The run starts in Bob-omb Battlefield. Now you might notice that and say that's not even the right stage, and you'd be completely right, but we need to start here to set up what's called the hole. But what is the hole? Well, let me explain. Hole stands for held object last position, and as its name suggests, it's a set of coordinates used by the game to track the held object's last position. The way it works is, whenever the game has to render the object Mario is holding, it updates these coordinates so it corresponds to a point slightly in front of Mario. When he drops the object he's holding, the hole stays in place until he picks up another object. But since the hole is only updated when the held object is rendered, that means that if the object Mario holds does not have to be rendered, the hole will not update. Whenever Mario releases an object, it's put down at the hole's position, regardless of Mario's position. This usually works very well, because the hole is supposed to be in front of Mario anyway, but it's possible to abuse its mechanic as we'll see in a moment. For now, the hole is set right here on top of the mountain. Interestingly, whenever you leave or enter a stage, the hole will stay at the same coordinates, so you can set the hole in a level and have it stay the same as you enter another level. Only now do we get into Tick-Tock Clock, and right off the bat, we use our preset hole to send a Bob-omb out of bounds. But how did this work? Well, as mentioned earlier, the hole only updates when the object Mario is holding has to be rendered, so if you could find a way to not render the held object, we could send it to a hole that does not actually correspond to a point in front of Mario. And here, that means sending it directly to that hole we set in Bob-omb Battlefield. And as it turns out, there is a very simple method to do that. If you somehow manage to have Mario face towards an object and a wall at the same time, just like in this situation, this is how the game will handle the interaction. First, the game looks at the interaction between Mario and the object. Here, Mario is facing towards the Bob-omb and he's in the diving action, so he grabs it. Then, the game looks at the interaction between Mario and the wall. Here, Mario is in the diving action and he's facing straight towards the wall, so he bonks. But because Mario is bonking while holding onto an object, he immediately drops the Bob-omb. As you can see, the Bob-omb is never actually rendered into Mario's hands, so the hope never updates. That means the Bob-omb is sent directly at the preset hope. Except it isn't, because that would put it way too high. Instead, since Mario dropped the Bob-omb, it's only set at the hope laterally, but at Mario's height, so it ends up closer to this spot instead. This is actually beyond the walls of the stage, and it's also out of bounds. This is where it will stay for a while, so just keep this in mind as we progress. Okay, now that this is out of the way, we need to somehow get to the next level of the clock. For this task, we can actually use the spinners. By carefully climbing a spinner, then falling off and ground pounding, we can stall in the air for just long enough to land on the run right above. Then, Mario starts sliding and bonks. The bonk takes priority on the slide, so we can stay on the spinner long enough for it to turn so it's no longer too steep to stand on. Then, we climb that spinner, ground pound to land on the one right above, bonk to stay on top of that platform until it lays flat, and repeat. We can use this technique to reach this part of the level, and all that in no A presses. We can now make our way onto the clock hand with a precise dive recover. Now, we side flip and dive using one A press to get to the cogs, and use another dive recover to get to the top cog. And now, we need something to cross this huge gap to the cage. Fortunately, we can just use this Bob-omb that appears out of thin air. But how did that bomb make its way up here? Well, as you might have guessed, this Bob-omb and the Bob-omb we sent to the hope at the start of the level are in fact one and the same. To understand how that's possible, we need to talk about a mechanic called the out-of-bounds failsafe. In general, Bob-ombs can't actually be put out of bounds, but the developers still implemented a mechanic to make sure that if a Bob-omb did end up out of bounds, it could come back to the level instead of being stuck there forever. So whenever a Bob-omb is dropped out of bounds, the game will recognize that it's in a place where it shouldn't be and snap it directly to Mario's position. This is why the bomb appeared right next to him in this clip. But if it was out of bounds all this time, why didn't it snap to Mario immediately at the start? Well, that's because of the Bob-omb's activation radius. If Mario is really far away from an object, most of the time it will be deactivated to save on memory. This means that the game will stop updating its state, so it won't move or be rendered, but the game will keep in mind its state before it was deactivated. Effectively, the object is frozen until Mario gets close to it again. So when the bob-omb was dropped at the hope all the way back at the start, Mario was actually outside of its activation radius, so it froze out of bounds and didn't move. But once Mario reached the top of the cog and got near the wall, he entered the activation radius of the bob-omb. At that point, the game finally realized that it was out of bounds and activated a failsafe to snap it directly to Mario's position. So now we have a bob-omb, but how do we use it to cross the gap? Well, the first thing is we have to wait for Mario to drop it and have it expand. This pushes Mario off of the platform. Then, we'd have to grab it again, land back on the cog, get pushed off a second time and fly into the cage. But how does this movement work? Well, that's all because of a glitch called hands-free holding. Mario can be holding objects in different action types. He can be idling while holding an object, running, sliding, falling, and many more. But sometimes, oversights in how the game handles transitions between these actions can make Mario lose this holding state. In that case, Mario is still holding an object, but his action doesn't reflect that fact. As long as he avoids certain action types that make him automatically drop the object, like idling or running, or that make him grab the object again, such as diving, he can keep that double state. To get into this special hands-free holding state, he can do some actions that were never intended to be chained together, like dive grabbing into a slide, or in this case, dive grabbing before being pushed off of the platform he's on. In this clip, hands-free holding is combined with another mechanic which you might already know about. Before a bob-omb explodes, its size increases dramatically. If Mario grabs it during the few frames where it's very big, he can get pushed backwards significantly. That's because when Mario is holding a bob-omb, it actually follows him around and stays slightly in front of him at all times. Usually this doesn't cause any problems, because Mario's hitbox and the bob-omb's hitbox don't touch, but when the bomb is bloated, its hitbox actually reflects this new size. Because the bob-omb is always a fixed distance away from Mario, no matter its size, their hitboxes overlap and the bomb pushes him back on every single frame. This is used in speedruns to push Mario into the cage behind the chain jump in bob-omb battlefield, and also to get inside of the pyramid without removing the tip in shifting sandland. Here, the bob-omb's larger hitbox also pushes Mario backwards and off the cog, putting him into a hands-free holding state, so he's in the same action as if he was falling without an object. That way, he can ground pound without dropping the bob-omb. Just like when climbing the spinners, this makes him stall in the air, but here the bob-omb pushes him the entire time, so he covers a lot of distance, enough in fact to land on this cog. Another ground pound gets him all the way into the cage. You might notice that Mario clips into the floor of the treadmill for a split second, but that's for a very simple reason. Usually, Mario isn't being pushed around during a ground pound, so the game assumes that he won't move into a floor at that time and doesn't check. Only at the end of the ground pound does it check for floors and find him inside the treadmill, so he snapped on top of it at the very end of his action. Finally, Mario makes it into the cage in only a single A press, but there's still a final problem to solve. The star is too high to collect with a dive recover. How can he get the star without the A button then? Well, that's when our final trick comes into play, vertical speed conservation. When Mario makes a move that takes him off the ground like a jump or a dive recover, the game will give him an initial vertical speed. Then, on every frame, gravity is applied which lowers this vertical speed until it dips into the negatives and Mario starts falling down until he lands. When he lands, he goes into a grounded action, like idling or running, and grounded actions don't use the vertical speed, so it's set back to 0. But as it turns out, for some actions, the developers forgot to make Mario's vertical speed go back to 0. For example, when Mario lands from a ground pound, his vertical speed will remain at its former value. However, this is usually unnoticeable, since the vertical speed is still zeroed out as soon as Mario starts moving with the joystick. But there are ways to make Mario move without the joystick. If Mario is on something like a treadmill, he can get pushed off without having to move himself. In that case, the conserved vertical speed is reactivated. Here, for example, since the conserved vertical speed was very negative because Mario landed from a ground pound, when it gets reactivated, he immediately falls much faster than expected. You can also punch, which moves Mario forwards a tiny bit without using the joystick, so the game doesn't reset the vertical speed in this case either. Now usually, this conserved vertical speed is useless in the context of the real-time A button challenge, because we want to gain height, and Mario has to fall down onto a floor to land and conserve his speed. Fortunately, there are ways to conserve positive vertical speed. For instance, a platform can move up faster than Mario and catch up to him, so he lands early. Or, if Mario has a lot of horizontal speed, he can land while going up if he's facing towards the top of a slope. And when he reactivates that positive vertical speed, you can see Mario makes a little hop. What's interesting is that, because he technically fell off of the platform he's on, he's in a state of freefall, which allows him to ground pound and grab onto ledges, so he can actually reach platforms that are not accessible to simple dive recovers. Going back to the cage, if you watch closely, you'll see there's a tiny slope on the edge of this treadmill, so if we dive recover onto it with enough speed, we can conserve positive vertical speed. But that's only half of the problem solved, because to collect the star, we need to somehow reactivate that speed by falling off of the treadmill. Fortunately, there's a tiny gap between the treadmill and the cage's floor, so we can punch our way there, reactivate our vertical speed, and grab pound to raise Mario just enough to catch the star. And so, that's how Roll Into the Cage was collected using only a single A press. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.